What would you do if the only thing you could afford was a dying foal no one wanted? For 50 cents, a fallen king bought a mistake. But what he didn't know was that the tiny creature he carried home would awaken the heavens and make him a legend whispered across centuries. This isn't just a story about magic. It's about redemption, sacrifice, and a love that outshined the gods themselves. The rain had a cruel rhythm that night, not a soft drizzle, but a steady, punishing downpour that drummed against the cobblestones like laughter from the gods themselves. Once, King Kale of Varenhold would have ridden through storms like this with a legion at his back, banners snapping proudly in the wind. The world would have parted before him. Merchants would have bowed. Children would have sung his name. Now, the only sound that followed him was the squelch of mud under torn boots and the snickers of drunk townsfolk as he passed. "Oi, Kale the crippled king," someone called from the shadows of a tavern doorway. "Looking for your crown in the gutter again?" He didn't bother to look up. He had learned that silence hurt them more than words ever could. The once golden streets of the capital were now little more than a graveyard of broken trade signs and sagging rooftops. Varenhold, the city he had built, the kingdom he had ruled with pride and mercy, now belonged to Lord Varen, the man who had whispered loyalty while sharpening knives behind his back. Kale's cloak was soaked through, heavy with water and shame. He clutched the remains of his coin pouch, 3 copper pieces, 1 silver, and a single half-tarnished gold token he couldn't bear to spend. The last relic of the throne he'd lost. He had come to the marketplace not out of hope, but hunger. The thought of warm bread, or perhaps even a flask of wine to dull the ache in his chest, had dragged him here. But as he wandered through the thinning crowd, his gaze snagged on a small, pathetic sight that halted him mid-step. Under a tattered canopy sat a filthy, trembling foal. She was little more than skin and bone, her mane matted with mud, her hooves cracked. She looked abandoned, but the merchant beside her, a squat man with a permanent sneer, barked out at him. "You looking to buy, stranger? Cheap meat, or maybe a pet for the wolves?" Kale frowned. "She's alive." "Barely," the man spat, kicking at the foal's flank. "Won't eat, won't move, won't sell. Her mother died birthing her. I've fed her everything but magic and gold dust." Kale's jaw tightened. "How much?" The merchant looked him up and down, eyes lingering on the threadbare cloak, the mud-caked boots. He smirked. "For you, fallen king? 50 copper." Kale reached into his pouch and poured out the coins he had, a handful of silver dust and 1 tarnished token. "This is all I have." The merchant snorted, about to turn him away, but then his eyes caught the glint of the old gold token, Royal Mint. "Deal." He snatched the coins greedily. Kale knelt beside the foal. Her eyes fluttered open, faintly golden beneath the grime. She trembled as he lifted her, but didn't resist. "Easy," he murmured. "No one's going to hurt you now." The merchant laughed. A dying king buying a dying horse. Poetic, that. Kale ignored him. The rain drenched them both as he carried her away through the streets. Behind him, laughter echoed like thunder. By the time he reached the outskirts of the city, night had deepened, and his arms burned from the weight. He stumbled into the ruins of an old cottage, his last possession, a shell of a home that had survived the rebellion. He laid the foal beside the hearth, where only ashes remained from fires long gone cold. She was barely breathing. "You're a fool," he muttered, half to her, half to himself. A fool saving another fool. He searched through his meager supplies, finding a flask of water, a pinch of dried herbs, and a ragged blanket. He mixed the herbs with water, whispering the same half-remembered prayer his mother used to say over the wounded hawks they'd rescued as a child. "Live," he said softly, pressing the mixture to her lips. "Please live." Her throat moved, just barely. As he wiped the grime from her coat, something beneath the dirt caught the light. A faint shimmer, a pattern of stars, etched naturally into her skin across the shoulder. It looked almost deliberate, a constellation forming the shape of a crown. Kale froze, staring. He blinked, convinced the flickering candlelight was playing tricks. But the pattern pulsed faintly, as if alive. And for the first time in years, for the first time since his banners burned, he felt it. That dangerous, forbidden spark.
Hope.
He sat there all night, tending the fire until it finally caught, feeding warmth into the dying room. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. Inside, a king without a crown watched over a creature no one wanted, both broken, both forgotten. But somewhere in the darkness, destiny stirred. And the world, though it didn't know it yet, would remember both their names. Morning came slowly, as if the sun itself wasn't sure this broken corner of the world deserved light. A thin line of gold seeped through the cracks in the shutters, stretching across the floorboards until it reached the tiny foal lying by the hearth. Her sides still rose and fell, faint but steady. Kale stirred from where he sat slumped against the wall, a threadbare cloak wrapped around him. His back ached, his throat was dry, but when he heard that soft, rasping breath, a weight lifted off his chest. "You made it through the night," he murmured. The foal's ears twitched weakly at the sound of his voice. Her eyes blinked open, still clouded with exhaustion, but bright enough to catch the sliver of morning light. For a moment, Kale swore he saw the faintest flicker of gold in them. He rummaged through the corner cupboard, finding a half-empty jug of goat's milk gone slightly sour. He warmed it over the rekindled fire and mixed in a pinch of crushed herbs. When he lifted the cup to her mouth, the foal hesitated, then drank, trembling, coughing, but swallowing every drop. Kale exhaled, half laughing at the absurdity. "You've got more fight in you than half my old generals." A knock startled him. It was faint, polite. A sound he hadn't heard in years. "Who in the abyss?" he muttered, grabbing a rusted dagger from the table. The door creaked open, and in stepped Mira, her gray cloak soaked from the rain, her hair bound in the same neat braid she'd worn when she served as the royal healer. "Still paranoid, I see," she said dryly, eyes flicking to the dagger. "You'd stab your own reflection if it startled you." Kale lowered the blade. "You shouldn't be here, Mira." "I heard," she interrupted, setting a basket on the table, "that the fallen king bought a dying foal for his last coin. I thought I'd see for myself whether you'd lost your mind completely." "Depends on your definition," Kale said, crouching beside the hearth again. "She's alive." Myra's tone softened as she approached. "Alive, is she? Let me see." Her hands, still steady after all these years, moved over the foal with practiced care, feeling her ribs, checking her gums, running fingers through her patchy mane. Then she froze. "What's this?" she whispered, brushing the foal's shoulder. Kale leaned closer. Beneath the grime, that strange constellation mark shimmered faintly. Myra's eyes widened. "I've seen drawings of such marks in the old palace archives. They called them astral seals." Kale frowned. "I've read the same tales. Horses born under the falling stars. Carriers of divine light." He shook his head. "Myths, meant to keep children quiet at night." "Perhaps," Mira said. "Or perhaps your family's crest." The crown of stars wasn't inspired by myth but memory. She stood, rummaging through her basket. "She needs care. Fresh milk, warmth, and company. And you, Kale, you need something to believe in." He looked at her, startled. "You think I bought her because I believe?" "No," Mira said gently. "I think you bought her because you missed believing." She prepared a small tonic of herbs and roots, then poured it slowly into the foal's mouth. "There," she murmured. "That should ease her lungs." Kale sat beside the creature, brushing her mane with trembling fingers. "She needs a name." Mira smiled faintly. "Then give her one. Names bind life to purpose." Kale thought of the night before, the faint glow under her skin, the way she'd survived when everything else in his life had refused to. "Solara," he said softly, "for the light that refuses to die."
"Fitting," Mira said.
"Let's hope she earns it." By evening, Solara was standing, wobbly and fragile, but upright. Kale guided her steps around the cottage, his hand steady on her neck. Each time she stumbled, she found her balance again, and each time he caught her, something in his chest ached less. Outside, the villagers gathered in the dusk, whispering. "That's him, the old king, playing farmer. Bought a beast instead of food. Madness runs deep in royal blood." Kale ignored them. He had endured worse than laughter. That night, as the fire burned low, Solara lay beside him. Her breathing had grown stronger, and when the moonlight filtered through the window, the mark on her shoulder gleamed again, brighter than before, casting tiny stars across the wall. Kale stared in awe. "You carry the heavens on your skin, little one." Solara lifted her head, her golden eyes meeting his. For a heartbeat, it felt as if she understood. He smiled. "Then we'll find our way back together." Outside, the storm had cleared, leaving the air crisp and silent. For the first time in years, Kale didn't dread the morning. And far away, deep in the palace that no longer bore his name, Lord Varen sat upon Kale's stolen throne and shivered, though he didn't know why. Something had shifted in the wind. Something that carried the faint scent of destiny. Weeks turned into months, and winter's grip loosened its claws over Varenhold. The snow melted from the hills, rivers began to hum again, and in the ruins of an old cottage on the city's edge, life found rhythm once more. Each morning, Kale rose before dawn to mend fences, repair the sagging roof, and gather feed for Solara. She had grown swiftly, her coat now a burnished white gold that caught every trace of sunlight. Her once shaking legs now carried her across the yard with a grace that made the neighbors stop and stare. They still whispered, of course. "Poor mad Kale. Thinks that beast will bring him back his crown. Maybe the gods curse them both." But the laughter faded over time. Not because the villagers grew kinder, but because they grew uneasy. Animals that approached Solara bowed their heads. Birds circled above her in near-silent formation. Even the wild dogs that roamed the outskirts gave her a wide berth. Kale didn't question it. He simply worked. The rhythm of caring for the foal dulled the ache of memory, the council's betrayal, the fall of his armies, the night the palace burned. He buried those thoughts under the simple comfort of purpose. Still, at night, the ghosts came. He'd dream of the throne hall, of banners torn from their posts, of Varen's voice dripping with false pity. "You were too merciful, Kale. The realm needs order, not kindness." Then the flash of steel, the sound of his guards turning against him, and the weight of the crown being ripped from his head. He'd wake drenched in sweat, clutching at the cold floorboards, until Solara's quiet breath calmed him. One morning, Mira returned, her arms full of fresh supplies. She looked him over with that half-critical, half-fond expression he remembered from the palace infirmary. "You've lost the haunted look," she said, almost like a man who remembers how to live. Kale shrugged. "She doesn't let me forget." Mira smiled and walked toward Solara. The mare, no longer a frail foal but still small for her age, nuzzled the old healer's shoulder, her breath warm and sweet. Mira frowned suddenly, tracing her fingers over Solara's constellation mark. "It's grown brighter." Indeed, the pattern of stars on her flank shimmered visibly, even in daylight. Each point pulsed like a heartbeat. "Does it hurt her?" Kale asked, alarmed. Mira shook her head.
"No."
"But the energy in it. I've only seen magic like this once before." She hesitated. "The night your father crowned you."
Kale blinked.
"You mean the rite of the star flame?" She nodded. When the priests blessed the crown, the torches burned blue, and the stars outside aligned over the citadel. It lasted only minutes, but I'll never forget the feeling, as if the heavens themselves were watching. Kale stared at Solara, who now pawed at the dirt impatiently, as if listening to something he couldn't hear. "That mark," Mira whispered. "It's not a birth scar. It's a call." Before Kale could ask what she meant, the mare turned toward the distant hills and neighed, a sharp, echoing sound that rolled across the valley. In the silence that followed, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke. Myra's expression darkened. "That's coming from the East Road." Kale's heart clenched. The Eastern Road led to the old citadel, the fortress where his loyalists had once made their last stand. He hadn't been there since the night Varen's men torched it. He saddled Solara for the first time that afternoon. She stood still as he fastened the worn leather straps, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. When he climbed onto her back, he expected her to stumble under his weight, but instead, she moved like flowing light. They rode through the outskirts, past the fields where children stopped playing to watch the strange pair pass, the broken king and his radiant steed. The closer they came to the hills, the thicker the smell of smoke grew. Cale's pulse quickened. When they crested the ridge, he saw it. Black plumes rising from the valley below, where the ruins of the citadel of Athemir still stood. And among the flames, banners bearing the Varen crest. Cale's stomach turned to stone. Varen's men were burning what little remained of his family's legacy. He dismounted, teeth clenched. He couldn't just steal the crown. He has to erase the memory of it. So Lara pawed the earth again, her mark flaring with pale gold light that cut through the smoke like dawn breaking through storm clouds. The soldiers below froze, shading their eyes. Then, impossibly, the flames nearest the fortress began to die. One by one, they hissed out, smothered by an invisible wind. Cale stumbled back in disbelief. By the gods. Myra's words echoed in his mind. It's a call. He turned to Solara. What are you? The mare only looked back at him, her eyes bright as molten amber. And for a heartbeat, Cale could swear he heard a voice, not in his ears, but somewhere deeper, inside his chest. Not what I am, Cale, but what you must become again. He dropped to one knee, trembling. The glow faded, leaving the air still and heavy. Below, the soldiers panicked, shouting about sorcery and omens. By the time they fled, the citadel's fires had gone cold. Cale remained where he was, staring at the horizon. After years of silence, the kingdom had just spoken back. And somewhere deep within him, beneath the guilt, beneath the ruin, the old fire of the king began to stir. Dawn crept like spilled gold over the ridges, painting the scorched ruins of the citadel of Athemir in shades of melancholy light. Smoke still drifted from charred stones, curling into the air like the ghosts of soldiers who had once died defending this ground. Cale stood at the edge of the courtyard, one hand resting on Solara's neck. Her flank still glimmered faintly, that celestial mark pulsing to some rhythm he couldn't hear. Every few seconds, she would lift her head and look toward the north, beyond the valley, beyond the hills, toward something unseen. You feel it too, he murmured. Whatever called you here, it's not done speaking. The mare's ears flicked, as if agreeing. He took a slow breath, surveying the destruction. Varen's soldiers had done their work well. The archives reduced to ash, the outer wall collapsed, the old banners unrecognizable. Only the statue of his father, the last High King, remained standing, cracked but unbroken, its stone eyes gazing forever toward the horizon. Cale brushed soot from the plaque at its base. The inscription was nearly gone, but a single phrase still stood out. May the stars remember our blood. A whisper in the wind seemed to echo the words. He made camp among the ruins, unwilling to return to the cottage. As night fell, he lit a small fire and sat beside Solara, who grazed quietly among the blackened grass. The silence of the valley was thick, but not empty. Every so often, Cale thought he heard faint murmurs. Too soft to be wind, too fleeting to be imagination. Like voices carried through time itself. He stared into the fire. Ghosts of Athemir, he said under his breath. If you can hear me, I didn't abandon you. I lost everything. And now I don't know what's left to save. The flames flickered. Solara raised her head sharply, her ears pricking toward the darkness. Then Cale heard it clearly. A voice, distant but distinct, carried through the night air. You were never meant to save what was. You were meant to awaken what will be. Cale jolted upright, his hand instinctively reaching for the dagger at his belt. The valley around him was empty, only wind, stars, and the sound of Solara's steady breathing. But then the constellation on her shoulder blazed. The light spilled outward, forming faint symbols in the air. Ancient runes he half recognized from the royal archives. He took a step closer, his shadow stretching long across the ruined stones. I've seen these before, he whispered. The astral sigils. In his childhood, priests had spoken of them. Marks said to reveal paths between worlds, guiding chosen souls toward forgotten places of power. And now one glowed before him, drawn not in ink or fire, but in light born of his horse's blood. Solara turned toward the north again, stamping her hoof as the light bent into a narrow beam that pointed directly into the distant hills. Kale's heart pounded. "You're showing me something, aren't you?" The beam brightened briefly, then faded, leaving only the scent of rain and the soft crackle of fire. Kale sank to his knees beside her. "If this is madness," he said softly, "then I'll follow it anyway." At dawn, he set out. The path through the whispering hills was overgrown and forgotten, a trail swallowed by moss and fog. The locals said the winds there spoke with the voices of the dead, the souls of kings who'd fallen before their time. Kale didn't believe in superstition anymore. But as he and Solara climbed the mist-shrouded slope, the whispers returned, not chaotic this time, but rhythmic, almost melodic. Kale of Varenhold, child of the crown, the bloodline remembers. He tightened his grip on Solara's reins, scanning the gray expanse ahead. The mist thickened until he could barely see 5 paces forward. Yet the mare moved with absolute certainty, unhesitating. "Where are you leading me?" he muttered. Then, through the fog, shapes began to emerge, stone pillars, hundreds of them, spiraling upward like the bones of ancient giants. Each was carved with runes older than his kingdom, glowing faintly in response to Solara's presence. Kale dismounted, walking between them. The air vibrated, humming with a strange, low resonance that prickled his skin. At the heart of the formation stood a stone altar, split in 2 but still magnificent. Upon it lay a fragment of metal, dull, yet unmistakable. Kale's breath caught. The royal circlet. It was the crown of stars. Or what remained of it. The same crown Varen had stolen and desecrated, reforged into his own symbol of power. Yet here, one piece had survived. He reached for it. As his fingers brushed the surface, a wave of energy surged through him, warmth and light flooding his veins. Visions burst behind his eyes. Flashes of his ancestors on the battlefield. The first king kneeling beside a luminous steed identical to Solara. A voice, calm and deep, echoing through the vision. "The light is reborn when the worthy have fallen." Kale stumbled back, gasping. The visions faded, leaving him shaking but alive. Solara stood beside him, eyes glowing faintly. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Kale took the fragment and pressed it to his chest. "Then the stars remember," he whispered. He mounted Solara again. Below the hills, the fog was beginning to lift, revealing the distant towers of Varenhold shimmering in morning light. "Let's go home," he said. "There's something there that needs reminding." By the time Kale and Solara descended from the whispering hills, the sun had broken fully through the clouds, burning away the last threads of mist. The valleys below looked smaller now, fragile, even. And in the far distance, the jagged outline of Varenhold Castle glimmered in the light like a blade half buried in the earth. Kale's heart tightened. That was once his home, and the wound of it never stopped aching. Solara moved with quiet purpose along the old King's Road, her hooves barely making a sound. Travelers they passed stepped aside instinctively, some bowing without knowing why. The mare radiated something unspoken, a nobility that made even the hardened mercenaries fall silent as she passed. Word spread fast through the countryside. "The fallen king rides again. He's found a ghost horse, glowing like fire under moonlight. The gods must be stirring." Kale ignored the murmurs, but he could feel them gathering behind him. Curiosity, awe, fear. The old world, long numb and resigned to Varen's rule, was beginning to stir again. When they reached the outskirts of Varenhold, Kale dismounted and stood at the top of the ridge. Below, the city bustled like an anthill under Varen's iron hand. Guards in crimson armor patrolled the market. The palace towers, once white and proud, were now painted in Varen's dull gray, as if he feared even color itself. Kale's jaw clenched. "He's stripped it of soul," he said quietly. Solara nickered softly, her golden eyes fixed on the tallest tower, the throne spire. Kale ran a hand through her mane. "You want to go in, don't you?" The mare tossed her head once. He almost smiled. "Then we'll need a plan better than walk in and hope they remember me fondly." He made his way through the lower district on foot, hood drawn low. Despite his ragged clothes, there was something in his walk. In the set of his shoulders, the steady rhythm of his stride, that drew glances. Even those who didn't recognize him felt the quiet gravity of a man who had once commanded legions. When he reached the old blacksmith's quarter, he stopped before a soot-streaked door. The sign above it had long since faded, but the hammer and flame emblem carved into the wood was unmistakable. Cale knocked 3 times in a pattern only 2 people alive would remember. Moments later, the door cracked open, and a weathered face peered through, one eye blind, the other sharp as a hawk's. "Cale?" "Hello, Garen." The old blacksmith flung the door wide, disbelief written across every line of his face. "By the forge, you're supposed to be dead." "Not for lack of trying," Cale said. "I need your help." Inside, the forge still glowed faintly, though Garen's tools were old and dulled. Cale told him everything, the fall, the foal, the mark, the visions. When he produced the fragment of the crown of stars, Garen nearly dropped his hammer. "You found this? The original?" "One piece of it." Cale set it on the anvil. "I need it reforged." Garen shook his head. "Varen melted the rest into his own crown, a mockery of yours. That metal's bound to him by blood magic now. Touch it and—" "Then I'll unbind it," Cale said, voice steady. Garen studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You've still got that fire." "I thought it died with your throne." Cale smiled faintly. "It almost did." He looked out the window, where Solara waited in the alley, sunlight rippling over her mane like liquid gold. "Until she found me." That night, Garen worked at the forge until sparks painted the ceiling like stars. Cale stood beside him, silent but resolute. The fragment of the crown glowed faintly with each strike of the hammer, as if responding to the rhythm of purpose. At midnight, the air shifted, heavy, electric. The forge's fire turned blue, licking at the edges of the metal with unnatural heat. Garen stepped back. "That's not my doing." Cale moved closer, feeling the hum in his bones. Solara, just outside, lifted her head and whinnied once, a long, echoing note that made the flames flare higher. When the hammer fell one last time, the fragment reshaped itself, no longer a simple piece of a crown, but something new, a circlet etched with constellations, half light, half steel. Cale lifted it carefully. It pulsed against his palms, warm as living skin. "What will you call it?" Garen asked quietly. Cale looked toward the window, where the night sky shone through smoke. "The diadem of dawn," he said. "For the day that follows ruin." By sunrise, Cale was gone. He rode Solara through the empty streets, cloak snapping behind him, the new circlet glinting faintly beneath his hood. The city seemed to sense his presence. Doors opened just a crack, faces peered from shadows. He didn't stop, not until the palace gates loomed before him. 2 guards crossed their halberds. "State your business." Cale looked up, the hood falling back from his face. The morning light caught his features, leaner now, harder, but unmistakable. "I am Cale of Varenhold," he said evenly. "And I've come for what was stolen." The guards hesitated, eyes wide, then stumbled backward as Solara stepped forward, her hooves sparking faint light against the stone. From the tower above, alarm bells began to ring. But Cale didn't flinch. He simply whispered to Solara, "Let them ring. The kingdom needs to wake." And as the gates of Varenhold shuddered open, dawn broke over the walls, bright, blinding, and full of promise. The gates of Varenhold groaned open, ancient hinges protesting under the weight of fate. For a moment, silence blanketed the city, as if every heartbeat paused to listen. Cale rode through slowly, Solara's hooves striking sparks on the cobblestone. The streets that had once cheered his name now gaped in disbelief. Vendors froze mid-sale, guards stumbled backward, children whispered to each other and pointed. "It's him. The King of Ashes." "No," the king returned. Every echo fed the growing storm in the air. Up in the tower, Lord Varen stood by the window, his reflection warped by the glass. Time had not been kind to him. His once youthful face was drawn and pale, his hair streaked with silver, his robes heavy with symbols of control, not loyalty. When his captain burst in, breathless, Varen's voice was calm, almost cold. "Speak." "Sire, it's Kale. He rides at the gate. The people." "The people," Varen cut in, "will forget their ghosts when reminded who commands their bread." He turned, eyes sharp as glass. "Lock the palace. Send word to the Crimson Guard. I want him alive for now." The captain hesitated. "My lord, the horse." Varen's tone darkened. "I said alive." Kale reached the palace square, the place where his coronation had once been celebrated with flowers and song. Now it stank of iron and smoke. Statues of his ancestors had been torn down and replaced with a single monolith, a towering, featureless obelisk bearing Varen's sigil, a coiled serpent devouring its tail. Kale dismounted slowly, gaze steady on the tower. "He's turned memory into fear," he murmured. Solara pawed the stone, her mark flaring. The ground beneath the obelisk vibrated faintly, a warning, or perhaps a promise. "Not yet," Kale said quietly, laying a hand on her neck. "Patience." The first wave of guards surrounded him. Crimson armor gleamed under the morning light, halberds raised. "By decree of Lord Varen," the captain barked, "you are under arrest for treason, false claim of lineage, and blasphemy against the crown." Kale tilted his head slightly. "You mean my crown?" The captain sneered. "You think you can just return after all these years?" The world moved on. Kale's eyes narrowed. "Then let me remind it." Before the man could react, Solara reared, striking the cobblestone with a sound like thunder. A wave of blinding light exploded outward. Not heat, not fire, but force, pure and pulsing. The guards were thrown backward, weapons clattering like rain. The crowd gasped. Kale swung into the saddle again, his voice carrying through the square. "I am Kale of the Line of Stars. This city was built by my blood, and it will rise by it again." For a heartbeat, the people only stared. Then, one by one, voices joined the silence. "Long live the king. Long live Kale." It was faint, hesitant, but it spread. A whisper became a murmur became a roar. From the tower above, Varen's calm shattered. "Sound the horns," he hissed. "Seal the gates. Crush this rebellion before it breathes." Within minutes, the square became a storm. The Crimson Guard poured in from every street, shields locking, their armor catching the glare of Solara's glow. Kale dismounted again, sword drawn. The blade Garen had reforged for him, its edge kissed by the same fire that had birthed the diadem of dawn. "Let's see," he muttered, "if honor still cuts as deep as fear." The first clash was brutal. Steel rang against steel. Kale moved like water, not the fury of youth, but the precision of a man who'd learned through pain. Each strike carried purpose. Each parry echoed memory. Solara moved beside him, her body wreathed in faint gold fire. Every time a soldier raised his weapon toward her, his armor grew too hot to hold. The battlefield shimmered with unnatural light. Then the ground itself trembled. The crowd screamed as shadows poured across the square. Varen's personal guard, cloaked in darkness, eyes burning crimson. Not men at all, but wraith-bound soldiers, their souls enslaved through forbidden magic. Kale's breath caught. "He's defiled even the dead." One of the wraiths lunged, blade leaving a trail of black smoke. Kale blocked, sparks flying, but the force nearly drove him to his knees. The air grew cold, the world narrowing to sound and motion. Solara screamed, a sound that split the air like lightning, and light surged from her body, scattering the shadows. When Kale looked up again, the wraiths had retreated, their forms flickering. And high above, on the balcony of the throne's spire, Varen finally appeared. He wore the twisted crown forged from Kale's stolen legacy, each melted star now a dull, blood-red gem. His smile was thin and cruel. "So the ghost remembers how to fight," Varen said, voice amplified by some unseen spell. "But ghosts don't rule kingdoms, Kale. They haunt them." Kale sheathed his sword and looked up. "Then you should be terrified, Varen, because I've come to haunt you." The people gasped, the soldiers hesitated, and even the clouds seemed to dim as the two men locked eyes, the usurper and the fallen king, bound by fate and betrayal. Then Varen raised his hand, and the obelisk behind Kale cracked open. From within the stone, something vast began to move, a creature forged of shadow and ash, bound by the same crimson magic that pulsed from Varen's crown. It roared, a sound that shook the city to its foundations. Kale stepped back, jaw set. So this is what you've become, a man hiding behind monsters. Varen's laughter rolled like thunder. Let's see if your light can outshine death itself. Kale turned to Solara, eyes blazing. Then let's give him dawn. The light from her mark flared, brighter than ever before, and for the first time since the fall, the bells of Varenhold rang not in warning, but in awakening. The shadow beast lunged. The people screamed, and the war for the soul of the kingdom began. The shadow creature towered above the city, its form shifting like smoke caught in a storm. Eyes like molten coal burned in its skull of mist and bone. Each breath it exhaled scattered tiles and shattered glass. The streets of Varenhold trembled beneath its weight. Kale stood firm in the palace square, the diadem of dawn pulsing faintly against his brow. Solara's golden fire flared around them both, throwing ribbons of light through the smoke. The crowd fled in chaos, scattering into alleys and doorways. But some, the brave or the desperate, stayed, watching as the fallen king faced a nightmare born of magic and ambition. Varen's voice carried from the tower above, cold and venomous. Bow, Kale. I offered you mercy once. I will not offer it again. Kale drew his sword, its edge gleaming like liquid starlight. You mistake mercy for weakness, Varen. It was mercy that built this kingdom, and your cruelty that's poisoned it. Varen laughed. Then let the gods decide which one survives. He thrust his hand downward, and the creature lunged. The beast struck with claws of shadow, slicing through the cobblestones like silk. Kale dove aside, rolling to his feet. Solara reared, her hooves blazing with celestial fire that seared the ground wherever they struck. Every impact between light and dark tore the air apart. Sparks of gold met clouds of black. The sound wasn't thunder, it was deeper, older. Something the world hadn't heard since the first dawn. Kale fought to keep his footing, his sword cleaving through tendrils of smoke that screamed like dying men. Each swing sent ripples of light through the darkness, but the beast's form only reformed, thicker, angrier. It feeds on despair, Kale realized aloud, ducking beneath a swipe that tore through a marble arch. The longer I fear it, the stronger it grows. Solara whinnied sharply, eyes burning. Kale met her gaze and understood. He dropped his sword. The crowd gasped. Varen leaned forward in disbelief. You surrender? Kale took a single step forward, his voice steady.
No.
I remember. He reached for Solara's neck, resting his hand over the mark of stars. This light was never meant to be a weapon, he whispered. It was meant to heal. At his touch, Solara's body blazed like the heart of the sun. The shadows recoiled, screaming. The air vibrated with energy so pure it made Varen stagger. Kale lifted his voice, not shouting, simply speaking, each word resonating with the calm authority of truth. You are not the darkness, Varen. You are its servant. But even the deepest night must bow to the dawn. Solara reared once more, and the light exploded outward, a wave of golden radiance that swept across the square. The creature convulsed, its massive frame unraveling into streams of smoke. The crimson glow in its chest flickered, then shattered like glass. The impact leveled the obelisk. The serpent's sigil upon it cracked, breaking apart into dust. When the light faded, only Kale and Solara remained standing in the silence. The beast was gone. Varen's tower still stood, but the balcony where he'd mocked them was empty. Kale looked up slowly. Through the haze, he saw movement. Varen descending the steps of the throne's spire, flanked by what remained of his guards. His robes were torn, the crown on his head glowing faintly red as if bleeding light. You think this changes anything? Varen snarled. You've destroyed the beast, but not me. This city is bound to my blood. You kill me, and it burns with me. Kael approached, sword in hand, but lowered. Then let it burn clean. Varen lunged, blade drawn, but Kael met him with a calm, practiced strike. Steel rang against steel. Sparks danced between them. For a moment, they were not king and usurper. Only two men, bound by history and hate. Varen fought like a man possessed, every swing heavy with rage. Kael fought like a man reborn, every movement measured, every strike aimed not to destroy, but to reveal. When their blades locked, Kael spoke quietly. You wanted to be remembered, Varen. This isn't how. Varen snarled and shoved him back, raising his sword for the killing blow, but Solara's light flared again, catching the crimson crown and melting its base. Varen screamed as molten metal fused to his skin. Kael hesitated, pity flickering for just a breath. Varen's eyes widened in disbelief. You still have mercy? Kael's voice was steady.
No.
I have peace. With a single, fluid motion, he struck, not at Varen's heart, but at the crown.
Stil met magic.
The artifact shattered, and with it, Varen's power unraveled into dust. The usurper fell to his knees, gasping. You fool, when the serpent dies, so does the city. But instead of collapsing, Varenhold began to breathe again. The crimson sigils that had haunted its streets faded, replaced by soft trails of golden light that spread through every alley and tower. Kael knelt beside Varen, who now looked small, not a tyrant, but a man undone by his own fear. You could have built something greater, Kael said quietly. Instead, you tried to own it. Varen's eyes closed, his final breath leaving as a whisper. I only wanted to matter. Kael stood, silent for a long time. Then you should have learned to serve. He turned away as the first sunlight of true dawn broke over the palace walls. The people emerged slowly from hiding, faces stained with soot, eyes wide with wonder. Someone began to kneel, then another and another, until the square was filled with bowed heads. Kael raised a hand. No more kneeling, he said softly.
Stand.
The Age of Thrones ends today. The Age of Light begins with all of us. The crowd rose. For the first time in generations, the sound that filled Varenhold was not of fear, but of hope. Solara stepped forward, lowering her head. Her constellation mark dimmed to a gentle glow. Kael rested his forehead against hers. You kept your promise, little one. You brought back the dawn. The battle was over, but peace never comes freely. The light that had saved Varenhold still lingered, soft and golden, stretching across rooftops and pouring through broken windows like liquid hope. The city breathed again, its heartbeat steady but fragile. Yet beneath that glow, Kael felt the weight of something dying. He turned to Solara, and his chest tightened. The brilliant fire that had burned in her eyes was fading. Her breaths came shallow, uneven. The shimmering constellation on her shoulder flickered like a candle in wind. No, Kael whispered, falling to his knees beside her. No, no, no. Solara nudged his arm weakly, as if to calm him. Her coat, once radiant, now dulled to pale silver. Every rise and fall of her chest seemed to pull more of the light from the world. Stay with me, Kael pleaded, voice breaking. We're free. We're finally free. Mira, breathless and bruised from the fight, knelt beside them. Her eyes glistened with sorrow as she pressed a hand to Solara's neck. The bond, it's consuming her. She's given everything she had. Kael shook his head. There must be something. Kael, Mira interrupted gently. You know the old legends. The Starborn only walk the world long enough to fulfill their purpose. She wasn't meant to stay. The words hit harder than any blade. Solara rested her head in his lap, her gaze soft, her breath shallow. For a moment, the world around them went silent. No wind, no fire, no voices. just the faint echo of her heartbeat fading beneath his hands. Kale bowed his head. You saved me from becoming the same monster he was. Solara blinked once, her eyes catching the dawn one final time. Then her body began to dissolve, not into dust, but into light. Tiny motes lifted from her fur, swirling upward, merging with the first rays of the morning sun. Kale reached out, but his fingers met only warmth. And then she was gone. He sat there long after the others had gone quiet. Around him, the city stirred to life, people tending to the wounded, children chasing the strange golden fireflies that drifted where Solara's light had vanished. But Kale stayed still, one hand pressed to the earth. Mira stood a few paces away, watching. She's not gone, you know, she said softly. Starborn never die. They returned to where they came from, the sky fields. Kale didn't answer. She'll be waiting, Mira continued, her voice trembling. When it's your time. Kale's hand clenched. She deserved a life beyond duty. Mira nodded slowly. So did you. He looked up at her, weary, hollow-eyed, yet alive in a way he hadn't been for years. Then maybe I'll finally live one worth her sacrifice. That night, Kale stood at the balcony of the ruined throne hall. The stars had returned, brighter than he'd ever seen them. And among them, one shone more brilliantly than the rest. A single golden star pulsing like a heartbeat. He smiled faintly. There you are. He closed his eyes, remembering the first night he'd found her, broken, trembling, and yet defiant. The mark that had glowed faintly even as she lay dying. The warmth that had rekindled his will to live. He whispered into the night, You didn't just save the kingdom, Solara. You saved me from myself. Over the next weeks, Kale refused the throne. He rebuilt the council not with nobles, but with farmers, merchants, and healers, the people Varen had once crushed beneath his greed. The palace gates remained open for the first time in centuries. Some called him king again. Others called him guardian. He called himself neither. I was a king once, he told Mira as they watched the sunrise over the rebuilt square. And I failed. This time, I'll be something simpler.
What's that? She asked.
Kale smiled. A keeper of light, the diadem of dawn, now dimmed to a gentle gleam, rested on the altar behind him. It no longer pulsed with power, only peace. He didn't wear it anymore. Some legacies are meant to be remembered, not repeated. As the months passed, travelers began to speak of a miracle, of a new golden star that had appeared above Varenhold, brighter than any other, guiding ships safely through storms and shepherds home through fog. They called it Solara's star. Children prayed to it before sleep. Lovers swore oaths beneath its glow. And every night, Kale would step onto his balcony, lift his gaze to that light, and feel a warmth spread through his chest, the same quiet, stubborn warmth that had once lived in the heart of a fragile foal. But light, no matter how gentle, always leaves a shadow behind. Far beyond Varenhold's borders, deep in the mountains where the earth never knew dawn, something stirred. In the black glass of a shattered temple, a faint ember glowed, a remnant of Varen's serpent magic. It twisted once.
Twice.
Then opened its eyes. The world remembered peace for 3 full years. The fields of Varenhold bloomed again. The rivers that once ran black with ash now glittered with gold and silver fish. The laughter of children returned to the streets where soldiers had once marched. Kale lived among his people now, not above them. He wore no crown, no armor, only a plain cloak and a scarred hand that still bore the ghost of a sword's weight. The palace had become a hall of learning and healing. The throne, untouched, remained at the end of the grand chamber, draped not with banners of conquest, but with Solara's saddle, gleaming faintly beneath the sunlight. Every morning, Kale would stop before it, his fingers tracing the worn leather. Still watching over us, aren't you? He would murmur. And above the city, Solara's star always answered, pulsing once, like a breath. But peace, like dawn, never lasts forever. It began with whispers. Merchants from the north speaking of strange storms that howled without wind, of crops that withered overnight, of rivers freezing solid under clear skies. Then came the travelers' tales, shadows that moved like beasts, unseen but felt, towns that woke to find every fire extinguished, every candle cold. At first, Kale dismissed them as superstition. The land had always been a breeding ground for rumor. But when the third caravan failed to return, and when the starlight itself began to dim at the edges of the sky, the unease in his chest grew into certainty. Something was returning. Something that should have died with Varen. He called the council together, Mira, Garen, the merchant Alan, and the young scholar Faye, who had translated the old texts about the astral sigils. Faye laid an ancient scroll across the table, her fingers trembling. We thought Varen's magic perished with him. But the serpent's power wasn't his, it was borrowed. Kale frowned. Borrowed from whom? She unrolled the parchment, revealing a depiction of an immense creature, not of flesh, but of endless night, ringed with stars. Around it, a dozen smaller sigils orbited like moons. The Aroeth, Faye whispered. The primordial serpent. The first shadow born when the stars began to burn. Legends say it sleeps between worlds, feeding on the light of dying suns. Myra's brow furrowed. If it's real, why now? Kale looked out the window, where the once bright horizon flickered faintly. As though something vast and unseen passed between the world and the stars. Because light always calls its shadow, he said quietly. So Lara's light didn't destroy the serpent. It only drove it back. The room fell silent. Then Garen spoke, voice rough. You mean it's coming here? Kale nodded once. Not just here. For me. That night, the wind howled again, but it wasn't the sound of storm or rain. It was whispering. Kale woke to the murmur of voices that seemed to come from the walls themselves. He lit a lantern, its flame trembling. The whispers formed words, distant but clear. The light took what was ours. The balance must return. The lantern went out. Kale turned slowly toward the balcony. Beyond the window, the stars had vanished. All but one. So Lara's star still shone, but its glow was being swallowed by a swirling ring of darkness. He ran outside. The air was heavy, metallic, charged with the same energy he'd felt the night Varen fell. In the distance, over the mountains, a shape began to form, vast and coiling, blotting out the heavens. Its scales shimmered like liquid void, each movement devouring the starlight around it. The Aroeth had awakened. By morning, all of Varenhold could see it. The serpent's body wound through the clouds, silent but suffocating. The light dimmed. The air itself seemed to thicken with dread. Kale stood before his people in the square. We've lived under shadow before, he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in the ground. And we survived. We'll do it again, not through crowns or swords or kings, but through each other. Mira stepped forward. Kale, if this creature is what Faye believes, we can't fight it with steel. We'll need the same power Solara used. Kale's gaze fell to the diadem of dawn, locked safely in its shrine. The circlet glowed faintly, as if waiting. He touched it once, and pain surged through him, light and shadow clashing inside his chest. He stumbled back, gripping the altar. Her power isn't gone, he gasped. It's in me now. The others stared in silence. Faye's eyes widened. Then you might be the last starborn. Kale looked toward the serpent swirling above the clouds. No, he said quietly. I'm just her echo. But maybe that's enough. That night, the serpent descended. The sky broke open like glass, and darkness poured through. Lightning struck the towers, tearing them apart. People fled into the catacombs as Myra's healers worked by torchlight. Kale climbed to the palace roof, the diadem blazing in his hands. If this is how it ends, he whispered, then let it end as it began, with light. So Lara's star flared once, bright enough to cast shadows across the entire valley. The serpent roared, a sound that shook the mountains. Kale raised the diadem high, its light bursting forth like 1,000 dawns. The serpent lunged, its jaws wide enough to swallow the world. And the two collided, light against eternity, gold against nothingness. The city below vanished in a blinding storm of radiance and shadow. When the light faded, the serpent was gone. But so was Kale. Only the diadem of dawn remained on the palace steps, its metal cracked but glowing softly, as though still remembering the man who had worn it. Above, Solara's star burned brighter than ever, its light unbroken. And far across the world, where the ocean met the sky, a single horse-shaped silhouette ran along the horizon, made of starlight and memory. Years passed, then decades. And though the seasons turned and generations rose and fell, the story of the starborn king never truly faded. In the rebuilt streets of Varenhold, now a city of gardens and glass, children played beneath a sky that shimmered brighter than it ever had before. Every night, when the sun dipped below the horizon, the heavens came alive with a crown of stars, 12 points of light encircling one blazing golden heart. The elders called it Kale's crown. The scholars called it the Solara constellation. But the people simply called it home. They told the tale differently in every tavern, every market, every school. Some said the king had ascended with his steed to dwell among the stars, guarding the balance of light and dark. Others swore he still wandered the far reaches of the world, a man of no throne and no name, guiding lost travelers with a whisper and a glimmer of gold. Whatever version one believed, all ended the same. When the world is swallowed by shadow and hope flickers its last, the starborn will ride again. The Hall of Dawn stood where the old palace once had. There were no walls of marble, no thrones, no guards. Only open air, wind chimes, and an altar where the diadem of dawn rested under starlight. It had never dimmed. Every year, on the eve of Solara's day, the people gathered to lay flowers and tell the story anew. Myra's great-grandchildren presided over the rites now, healers, not rulers. Garen's apprentices forged tools instead of weapons. And though no one alive remembered Kale's face, every person in Varenhold knew his words, etched in the stone beneath the altar. No crown shines brighter than the light we kindled together. One evening, long after the festival fires had died, a child slipped into the hall. He was no older than 8, barefoot, his tunic too big for his frame. He climbed the steps to the altar and stared at the diadem, its light reflecting in his eyes. "It's real," he whispered. "You really were here." As if in answer, a faint breeze stirred the chimes. The boy smiled, placing a tiny wooden horse beside the crown, a gift carved by his own small hands. "Good night, King Kale," he said softly. "Good night, Solara." He turned to leave, but paused. From the edge of the hall, in the shadows near the open archway, a tall figure watched him. Cloaked in gray, a hood drawn low, his face was hidden, but his stance, his quiet stillness, felt old. Timeless. The boy blinked and, for a moment, thought he saw something glimmer beneath the hood, the faint outline of a scar, and eyes like liquid gold. "Who are you?" he asked. The figure smiled, a small, tired, knowing smile. "Just a traveler," came the reply. "One who came to see the dawn." Then he turned and walked into the starlit night, vanishing before the boy could take another breath. When the child looked back, the diadem shone a little brighter. And high above the clouds, Solara's star pulsed twice, as if in farewell. Far beyond the borders of the known kingdoms, on a cliff overlooking an endless sea, a lone rider stood. The man's cloak rippled in the wind, his silver hair touched by starlight. Beside him, shimmering faintly, was a horse made of pure light, her mane a river of gold, her eyes warm and familiar. Kale reached out, resting a hand on her neck. "You waited." Solara's gaze met his, and the horizon before them split with the first light of dawn. "I told you I'd find you," he said softly. The mare stamped once, her glow rising until both of them shone brighter than the sun. As the light enveloped them, Kale turned his eyes to the world below, his kingdom, reborn and thriving, and smiled. Then they were gone. Only the morning remained. And so the legend ends, not with crowns or thrones, but with two souls who found each other in ruin and carried hope back into the world. When the light falters, when the stars fade, remember this. Even a fallen king can rise again. Even the smallest flame can bring the dawn. In the end, the crown was never the victory. It was the light they carried, the bond between a fallen king and the creature who refused to let him fall. Kale didn't just reclaim his throne, he reclaimed his heart. And when his story faded into legend, the world didn't remember the wars or the ruins. It remembered the hope that somewhere beyond the storm, a single star still burns for those brave enough to follow it. So, if this story moved you, if you felt the fire, the loss, the love, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more tales from the shadowed worlds. More dark fantasy love stories where light and loss walk hand in hand. Because every ending is just another beginning waiting to shine.